Hello and welcome. How much of a threat is the growing influence of the Taliban and al-Qaeda in Pakistan, and is it pushing the country to civil war? The Pakistani army has been waging a major offensive against Taliban forces in the north and south Waziristan tribal areas. It's also fighting in Swat Valley, where the fighters had effectively taken over control of the region at one point. While the army says it managed to re-secure control of most areas, waves of bombings have ripped through Pakistan's cities, killing hundreds. The Taliban has claimed responsibility for many of those attacks and says it will continue as long as the Pakistani army continues its operations. The seeds of the Pakistani Taliban were sown around 2001 after tens of thousands of fighters crossed the border into Pakistan during US-led operations in Afghanistan. Critics of Pervez Musharraf, who was president at the time, says he allowed the Taliban to grow because Islamabad saw the fighters as a potential weapon against India. As observers say, the free rein the Taliban had gave it the chance to organize and become a disruptive force in the country. And today we ask, how close is Pakistan to descending into a state of anarchy, and what risk is there of it destabilizing the rest of South Asia? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email. Now, joining me from Lahore is Pakistani journalist and best-selling author Ahmed Rashid. He's written several books on the influence of the Taliban and al-Qaeda in South and Central Asia. His latest book is entitled Descent into Chaos: The United States and the Failure of Nation Building in Pakistan, Afghanistan and Central Asia. Ahmed, it's great to have you back on the show. Thanks for joining us from Lahore.
Thanks very much indeed.
Listen, let me start off by asking about, we recognize the situation in Pakistan deteriorating so much over the past year, but is it scaremongering to say the country is being pushed to the brink of civil war?
Well, I think we're quite far away yet from civil war, but certainly there is a growing sense of anarchy. There's a sense that the government does not have this terrorism issue under control. There is a sense that the extremists are being able to capture and hold territory in the tribal areas despite the military offensives. So it's a very grim situation. And the other thing that I think has happened in the last 6 months or so is that the extremists have shown that they're now a nationwide movement. They are able to enlist militant groups in Punjab who were previously fighting against India and Kashmir. They've been able to recruit sectarian groups in Karachi and other places. So they can well now claim to be a nationwide movement, and that is very dangerous.
Considering what you just said and the way this network has spread across the country, what real chance is there of Pakistan's government taking proper control of the country then?
Well, I think, Riz, the other problems are that, we have two major crises running alongside this. The first is a political crisis. There's a very severe standoff at the moment between the politically elected government of President Asif Ali Zardari on one side and the judges, a section of the media and perhaps a section of the army on the other side. And this has been an ongoing crisis for several months and has really paralyzed governance, if you like. The second issue is the economy. It's very dire. We had a lot of promises of aid from Europe, from other countries, but Pakistan has not received the aid it really requires. And as a result, right now, there's inflation is extremely high. There's a lot of joblessness, no electricity, no gas, all the kinds of things that would be fueling the appeal and the propaganda of these extremists.
We had a question from a viewer on our Facebook page. If I could put this to you, please. It came from Abdul Ismail in the UK. And Abdul wrote in saying, the Mujahideen Taliban were created by the inter-services intelligence and funded by the CIA as a proxy to fight their war against the Soviets, so it's relatively easy to conclude that high-level contacts still exist between the ISI and Taliban, supposedly opposing parties. It seems it remains to be seen, however, if the ISI is operating independently of the government's official position. But isn't it a case of Pakistan's ISI basically having to reap what it sowed all those years ago in setting up the Mujahideen, now Taliban?
Well, I think that's very true, and I think privately people in the military do admit that the military was supporting the Taliban regime in the 1990s. As you said in your intro, President Musharraf allowed both Pakistani and Afghan Taliban to settle in the tribal areas in Pakistan, and for about 4 or 5 years after 2001. Nobody touched them. They developed their own territorial control. They were able to resuscitate the movement in Afghanistan. And then, of course, what happens is that they inculcate a lot of extreme ideological education to the Pakistani Taliban and radicalize their own hosts. These Pakistani Pashtun tribesmen who were looking after them were radicalized by the Afghan Taliban and by al-Qaeda, and then they set out on their own adventure to Talibanize Pakistan. And now clearly the Pakistani Taliban is a very serious threat. But for many years the military, the ISI, did not recognize them as a threat, and in fact kept them on the back burner, as it were, in order to keep the pressure on the Americans to keep supplies of money coming in from the Bush administration and from Congress. So certainly I think, you know, the military, the ISI, under previous regimes and under the former regime of President Musharraf, you know, have helped create some of the present crisis.
Now, Ahmed, we had, you know, on the show, we tried to get a lot of viewer questions in, so let me put another one that came in, this time from Saudi Arabia, from Sayyid Zaki Ahmed, who wrote in saying, why did the West leave Pakistan alone after the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan? Pakistan has lost 2,000 soldiers, more than that of NATO, and the economy has been severely damaged due to the war on terror. Pakistan is not promoting terrorism. It has been a victim of terrorism and militancy. Your thoughts on that?
Well, the reason the United States left both Afghanistan and Pakistan, literally abandoned the region after the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, and I think both countries paid a huge penalty for that, because of course Afghanistan had the Taliban, Pakistan had a period of enormous unrest because of the repercussions from Afghanistan, and then of course al-Qaeda developed and we had 9/11. So that was an enormous tragedy, which thankfully the Obama administration has admitted to. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and others in the administration keep talking about this and keep emphasizing that they won't repeat this. Now, on the other side, I think it's a mixture of both. I think on the one hand, certainly Pakistan has been a victim of the 30-year-long war that has gone on in Afghanistan and the 60-year-long conflict that has gone on with India. Now, but apart from that, I think Pakistan has also been responsible for creating you know, a lot of what is happening now. In other words, for many years, the military backed extremist groups who were fighting the Indians in Kashmir. Those extremist groups are now attacking the very army that trained them. They're attacking the army headquarters, the ISI headquarters. For many years, we backed and supported the Afghan Taliban, who now have created the Pakistani Taliban. So I think, you know, the issue has been that Pakistan too has to be held responsible for a lot of the mistakes that have taken place.
Now, how do you regard the view that's being put out by a lot of analysts nowadays that Pakistan, in spite of this sort of strength of the Taliban, is unlikely to become overrun by the Taliban or completely controlled by the Taliban, but that the effect will be that there will be a greater increase in the Islamicization of Pakistan and much more of an anti-American sentiment?
Well, I think, you know, already, I mean, we are seeing certainly in the last 12 months or so, a much greater degree of public mobilization and dislike and hatred against the Taliban. And that is something very positive. There's been a lot of welcoming for the army and its operations in the tribal areas, a lot of public support for that, a lot of media support. So I think certainly, you know, the Taliban do not command any degree of mass support or sympathy in this country, and certainly their tactics of killing women and children, bombing bazaars, bombing schools, has not endeared them to the population. And so it's a very similar situation to Afghanistan, where the Taliban might be effective, they might be ruthless, intimidating, being able to carry out enormously successful operations, but they are not popular and they're not publicly supported. I think that is very clear. And that is why I don't see how the Taliban can go much beyond creating, yes, they can create anarchy, mayhem, they can prevent economic development, they can prevent investment, they can destabilize the government, they can carry out assassinations of ministers and people as they have done in the northwest frontier, but they can't actually topple. This is a government with an army of more than 500,000 men, with a population of 160 million. It's the 7th or 8th largest country in the world. I mean, unless there's a massive public uprising, which is very far removed at the moment, I don't think the Taliban can be successful.
Ahmed, don't go away. We have many more questions for you. We have to take a short break, but there's more of our discussion when we return. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're examining the growing influence of the Taliban and al-Qaeda in Pakistan and discussing the impact it's having on the stability of the country and the region in general. I have with me best-selling author and renowned journalist Ahmed Rashid, who's been writing recently and researching the issue extensively. He's joining us from Lahore in Pakistan. I have a question here, Ahmed, that came in from our Facebook page from a viewer by the name of Ishfaq Bugio, who says, can the US stop interfering inside Pakistan? And I wonder what your thoughts are on the way the US has changed its Pakistan strategy more recently. Do you feel there's a sense of some kind of genuine commitment to Pakistan and sorting out the situation in Pakistan? And isn't to some degree the American presence becoming a unifying force for the extremists and those who are developing the anti-American sentiment?
Well, let me say that there is enormous anti-Americanism in Pakistan. And this is a result of a variety of reasons, but certainly it's, it's not being helped by the use of drone missiles inside Pakistan by the Americans, the killing of civilians, and the killing of militants, it must be said, and the successful killing of several leading members of al-Qaeda. But really at the moment, I think the Obama administration is trying to make a very big difference from what President Bush was pursuing. We have a commitment from the Obama administration for $1.5 billion a year in aid for the civilian sector, that is education, health, and infrastructure. Now, Bush gave $11 billion over 7 years to Pakistan. 80% of that went to the military. And much of that aid was used up to buy weapons against India, rather than using that money to buy weapons to counter extremism and terrorism. Now we have a very solid commitment from the Americans for the development of the social sector. There has been the promise of another $5 billion by the European countries, but none of that has come through. At the moment, only the American money is coming through. Certainly, I mean, there has been this change of attitude. But I think a lot more will have to be done. It's not just a question of one day or one aid package that is going to undercut the anti-Americanism that runs very deeply here. I think the key issue is, can the army and the intelligence services and the Americans be able to chalk out a common strategy, especially in the next 18 months in Afghanistan? It's a very tense time right now between America and the military, because the Americans are insisting that Pakistan should capture or kill the Afghan Taliban who are living here, especially the leadership, which is known to be living in Pakistan. These kinds of issues have to be resolved before we see a real coming together of the United States and Pakistan.
Well, that cynicism that you, or at least the anti-Americanism that you mentioned, is evident in an email we got from South Korea. This is not a civil war. Americans are trying their best to destabilize Pakistan. They want to control the nuclear arsenals by weakening Pakistan. And I know there's been a lot of fear-mongering about the Taliban will have their hands on the missiles, and Pakistan is a nuclear force, a nuclear power in this respect. What serious consideration is there given to the potential threat of the nuclear weapons falling into the wrong hands there?
Well, certainly, I think the intentions of al-Qaeda and the intentions of some of these Pakistani Taliban groups would be very much to carry out either to carry out some kind of terrorist attack against a nuclear facility, or to somehow penetrate one of these facilities. But frankly, I don't think it's possible. I think there's certainly the army is very much in control of these facilities. Pakistan's nuclear program has never been controlled by the civilian government. It's always been controlled by the military. They're very much on top of things. And I think the Americans have secretly cooperated very closely with the army in providing more fail-safe methods and security. We know, for example, that Bush gave the Pakistan military $100 million very early on after 9/11 to make nuclear weapons safe. Now, we don't know exactly what happened with that money, but certainly, I mean, the Pakistan military did spend that money on making nuclear weapons safe. And I don't think we would see the kind of cooperation between the Americans and the Pakistanis, the aid package that Pakistan is about to receive, the cooperation that is going on, especially now with the Obama administration, if Pakistan was not looking after the security of its nuclear weapons. I think if the US felt that Pakistan was being negligent or not taking this issue seriously or not securing the nuclear weapon facilities in an efficient way, I think there would be much greater tensions with the United States, and the United States would probably go public with those tensions. So the fact that the US is helping Pakistan, I think, is an indicator that for the time being at least, the weapons are safe.
Now, yeah, Ahmed, I spoke with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton recently about Pakistan's strategy, and she talked a lot about winning hearts and minds, and that's evident, as you say, in this aid package. It's much more towards building the infrastructure and the sort of cultural side of the country rather than going directly into the military. But I wonder, is it too late to win hearts and minds now? Has everything gone too far?
Well, so, I mean, certainly if you look at events in the northwest frontier where most of the Taliban attacks are taking place and the bomb blasts in Peshawar and other cities up there, it would certainly look like it. But we have to remember that Pakistan is a very big country with a very large population. And I think the root cause of a lot of the anti-Americanism certainly is the foreign policy of America in countries like Iraq and the Middle East and its position on Israel and other things. That goes without question. But I think at the same time, if the Americans are seen to be helping the Pakistan economy, the education system that has virtually collapsed, the health system, the infrastructure, bringing in investment, I think certainly the mood can change. Pakistan now has a very powerful media which plays a very influential role in the country, and hopefully for the better. It has a growing middle class. It has a very strong business class, which unfortunately is not doing well at the moment because of the recession. But all these sectors of society are the real opinion makers in society. Mm-hmm. They need to be wooed and won over. What they need is investment in economic advancement and development. Really, I think what the West needs to do to really win hearts and minds is to try and turn the economy around and, of course, to improve governance.
Isn't one of the issues, though, that much of the problem lies with the outlying areas of Pakistan, which are largely out of the government's direct control or reach, and much more sort of tribal and much more sort of unruly in that respect, and perhaps they don't see the benefit of this kind of hearts and minds approach. But I wonder also the impact of the Pakistani military's effort to try to encourage those communities to activate their own lashkars or militias, local militias, in an effort to become more sort of in control of the area. Isn't there a danger of just increasing the general militancy of these areas?
Well, Riz, I really think the problem has partly been created by the military itself in the early years after 2001, because they were playing all sides. They were playing with the Taliban, they were playing against the Taliban, they were funding one group against another group, then funding the other group against another group. And it's taken punishing years for Pakistan, I think, to learn the lesson, and the military and the intelligence services to learn the lesson that these Taliban are not a good idea. It's only in the last 18 months or so that we've seen the military and the ISI and the government and civil society all talking from one page and actually going up against these militants. Now, what happened in the frontier and with the tribes was that during this period of the military playing ducks and drakes with one group and the other, the tribes got demoralized. Many of them joined the Taliban. Many of them were decimated by the Taliban. The military never protected anyone. They never were responsible for helping their own pro-government tribal elders and tribal chiefs, protecting their lives, protecting their interests. So tribal society has actually been decimated by this last 8 or 9 years of warfare and Talibanization. Well, and only now are we seeing the military trying to get Talibanization back in some form.
Where do you see India fitting into all of this, Ahmed? Because, of course, fingers are being pointed at India, saying that it has some kind of complicity in the destabilization of Pakistan, that it's active in trying to destabilize some of those regions as well.
Well, you know, the problem is that I think India is a very important part in all this. The fact is that after the Mumbai bombings last year, India broke off all diplomatic relations with Pakistan. A year has gone by now since Mumbai, and India has still not resumed relations with Pakistan. Now, this is becoming obviously a very contentious issue. President Zardari has reached out to India several times and earned the wrath of the military here and right-wing religious parties and the extremists for kowtowing to India. And he's now backed down and is also quite belligerent against India. The point is that I think the military is not going to be able to concentrate on the threat of the Taliban on the western border unless there's some kind of dialogue with India, and unless the military is able to withdraw some of its troops from the eastern border. Remember that 80% of the Pakistan army is deployed on the eastern border against India. Right. If the army could find some modus operandi with the Indians, we could withdraw troops from the Indian border, move them to the Afghan border, and deal with this Taliban threat much more effectively. Right. Unfortunately, the Indians are not allowing that to happen.
Well, unfortunately, there I have to stop you. I thank you again. It's a real pleasure to have you back on the show. Thanks for your analysis of the situation there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being with us too. Remember, you can watch a podcast of the Riz Khan Show and other Al Jazeera programs on iTunes. This week we're featuring a discussion on Iran's recent anti-government demonstrations and political divisions. On the next show, we speak to the UN's top envoy to Afghanistan, Qaidi, who's calling for a totally new approach towards that war-torn country. Instead of relying on military force, Ambassador Eidi is arguing for more attention to be paid to the country's economy and civilian institutions. We'll ask him about the prospects for stability in Afghanistan. Be sure to tune in for that. But for me and the team, until then, we'll see you next time.